My boss looked me in the eye and said, "You're just the maid." I swallowed silently, but deep down I knew one day he would see who I really was. I just didn't imagine that his life and that of his family would depend on it. My boss, Richard, is the kind of man who seems to think the whole world revolves around him. Tall, always wearing an expensive suit, smelling of strong perfume, and with a stern expression. He walks around the mansion as if he owns the very air we breathe. When he talks to me, he never looks me in the eye. It's like he's talking to the wind. "Coffee? No sugar. Now," he says, and I just reply, "Yes, Mr. Richard." The mansion is enormous, filled with marble, glittering chandeliers, and seemingly endless staircases. But none of that matters to him, because what occupies his mind is money, meetings, and business. In his office, he speaks loudly, almost shouting, as if the rest of the world were obligated to obey him. His wife, Claire, is different, but also distant, always well-groomed, in chic dresses and heels that echo on the marble floor. She's not rude, but she doesn't really see me either. She's always busy with events, dinners, and friends. She seems to live in a world of her own, far removed from mine. The only one who seemed to have a heart in that house was Liam, their son, a sweet, curious, but very lonely 10-year-old boy. He grew up surrounded by luxury, expensive toys, and private tutors, but he lacked the most important thing: true affection. Sometimes he would strike up a conversation with me in the kitchen, and I could see in his eyes the longing for someone close by. "Can I stay here with you for a bit?" he asked, fiddling with his cutlery. I smiled and replied, "Sure, Liam, just don't let your mom see you here, or I'll be the one to take the fall." "And what about me?" I was invisible. I was there every day, cleaning every corner, listening to every conversation, but never being heard. I walked the halls silently, as if I were part of the decor. I knew my place, at least until that day when everything changed. It was dinner night at the mansion. The entire house smelled of good food and floor polish. The living room chandelier shone like a glass sun. The long table looked like a mirror, a white tablecloth stretched taut, heavy cutlery, plates I held for fear of breaking. The crystal glasses flickered with candles. I walked silently, in flat shoes, balancing the tray. My footsteps barely made a sound on the marble. The guests chatted about expensive things, travel, stocks, a new restaurant in Beverly Hills. I didn't understand half of it, but I memorized who liked sparkling water, who ordered red wine, who didn't eat meat. It was my job to know without showing off. Richard, at the head of the table, had that commanding air. His face was serious, his jaw set. Claire looked like a picture in a magazine, her hair tied back, her light dress, small jewelry that sparkled when she moved her head. Liam was among them, small in that oversized chair, 10 years old, with the look of someone who'd rather be on the living room floor, building Lego. I'd placed a piece of tender meat, mashed potatoes, and colorful vegetables on his plate. He poked at it with his fork, curious, as if playing with the colors. As I passed by, he whispered, "It looks nice, but it smells weird." "Eat slowly, Liam," I said softly, like a mother's advice. Richard raised his glass in a toast. The room grew quieter. "Here's to the week's victories," he said. The guests repeated, "Here's to the victories," and took a sip. I continued serving, behind the chairs, arranging napkins, changing plates. Then I heard a dry, short sound. A gurgle caught in someone's throat. I quickly turned my head. Liam was holding his fork in the air, still, his eyes wide open. He coughed, but it was a weak cough. His hand went up to his neck. The color of his face changed in a second, from pink to red, and from red to a shade that scared me. "Liam?" Claire spoke first, wondering at her son's expression. He didn't respond. His lips parted, but no sound came out, only a weak, desperate breath. I felt my heart pounding inside my uniform. I carefully placed the tray on the sideboard, trying not to tremble. The buffet waiter looked at me, unsure of what to do. The chef appeared in the kitchen doorway, a cloth in his hand, and stood there as if held by invisible glass. "What's up, son?" Claire half rose, her hands in the air, uncertain. Liam tightened his grip on his neck. The veins in his neck stood out. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound that cut through me. The glass beside him toppled, the wine spilling like blood onto the white tablecloth. "He's choking," I said, in a whisper of a voice that didn't seem to be mine. The guests all stirred at once. The sound of silverware falling, chairs banging, voices overlapping. "Water! Give me water!" someone shouted. "No, not water!" someone else replied, not knowing where they got that from. "Call 911!" I heard in the background, and a cell phone fell to the floor. Richard stood, his hand in his pocket, but his body stiff, as if locked inside. I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, fear. He looked at his son as if he couldn't understand what it was like to have a real son there. Suffering, his face, always so confident, fell. "Liam, breathe, boy," he said, but his voice was cracked. Claire started crying in anger at her own crying. "Someone do something," she screamed, grabbing the napkin, crumpling the expensive fabric like it was paper. I took a step, just one. I felt the cold ground through my shoe. My body wanted to run, but my head held my arm from the inside. His words came like a slap. "You're just the maid." I held my breath without realizing it. My heart pounded in my throat, and my hands sweated. Liam tried to cough again, but nothing came out. His cheeks were already turning purple. The noise in the room turned to a buzz. I saw a piece of meat on his plate, too thick for a child's mouth. I remembered the way he'd eaten it, in a hurry, because someone had made a joke and he wanted to laugh. These things happen in seconds, seconds that feel like hours. "He's going to faint," a woman said, covering her mouth. "Move him. Hit him on the back." A man approached, not daring to touch him. The tray on the sideboard slid slightly and clinked. I smelled the meat, the hot sauce, Claire's perfume mixed with the sweat of fear. The air grew heavy. The candlelight trembled on the walls, making it seem like the house was trembling with us. "Excuse me, please," I said, almost asking the air for permission. I knew that sound. I'd seen a similar scene years ago at a simple first aid course in my neighborhood. I remembered the rubber dummy, the instructor saying, "First, see if the person really can't breathe. Hands on the neck is a sign. Wide eyes, color changing." I remembered the instructor's hands holding my waist to teach me the right point, the right amount of force. I remembered her final phrase, "You can save someone with your body." That memory came like a flash. But fear came with it, just as strong. What if I do it wrong? What if they tell me to stop? What if he gets worse and I'm the one to blame? "Give him some room," someone said, pushing back their chair. "Take off your tie," another suggested, confused. Liam wasn't even wearing a tie. Claire tried to hug her son, but she couldn't quite figure out how. Her hands were shaking so badly that she simply touched his back and stepped back, startled by her own tremors. "He's not breathing!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Someone, please!" The wall clock ticked. I swear I heard it tick through the chaos. 1 second, 2, 3. With each tick, Liam's eyes lost a bit of their shine. He saw me. I know he saw me, and I saw a cry for help in his eyes, a cry that had no sound. "Breathe, Liam. Breathe, please," I whispered, more to myself than to him. The tablecloth, now stained with wine, dripped down the edge of the table like a large tear. The chef still stood in the doorway, white as flour. The guests were scattered in a crooked circle, as if a hole had opened in the middle of the room and no one knew what to do with it. I took a deep breath. The air rushed in and burned. My chest ached. I felt my whole body say, "Go." My head said, "Wait." And I stood there, half step away, my heart pounding in my throat, watching the boy grow increasingly breathless. I tried to speak, but my voice failed. Liam's fingers gripped the back of the chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes filled with tears. He didn't cry. He couldn't. He just stared, begging. I took the last step. Fear stayed behind me. "Excuse me. Give me some space," I said firmly, surprised at my own courage. People parted. I reached Liam around the side of the chair. "Liam, look at me," I said softly. "I am here. Breathe. I'll help you." He looked at me with those huge eyes, gasping for air. His hand was still clutching his neck. I gently pulled him up and stood him up, leaning forward slightly. His body felt light and hard at the same time, his chest barely rising. "What are you going to do?" Richard asked, his voice broken. "Help your son," I replied, without taking my eyes off the boy. "I need no one to touch." Now, my hands found the spot on my stomach, above my navel, just as the instructor had taught me years ago. The fabric of the shirt was soft, expensive. Beneath it, a heart was beating rapidly. "Son, listen to me," I said. "It'll be quick, okay? Trust me." I held on tight, a sharp push, inward and upward. "1," I said, as if counting to myself. Liam let out a low sound like a breath. Nothing came out. The candles flickered again, and the entire room held its breath. "Oh my God!" Claire cried, her hand over her mouth. I braced my feet on the marble to keep from slipping. My sweaty hand wouldn't let go of the boy. Again, inward and upward. 2. I heard one guest whisper, "That's dangerous," and another replied, "Leave her alone." The waiter leaned against the wall, praying softly. The chef, pale, clutched the cloth to his chest. "Come on, Liam," I said firmly. "Stay with me, champ." 3rd push. I felt his air grate, as if a door were about to open. 3. "He's turning purple," someone shouted, and panic swept around the table like the wind. 4th push. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears, like a drum. My vision sharpened. Only the boy and I existed. The expensive perfume, the spilled wine, the wide eyes, everything blurred. 4. "Or do you want me to call an ambulance?" Richard asked, lost. "They already called," someone answered behind me. "Go on." Claire's voice came out, shaky but determined for the first time. 5th push. I felt Liam's body jerk, a harsh sound, a louder gasp. 5. "That's it," I whispered. "A little more, just one more." I reshaped the base of my feet, took a deep breath, and concentrated all the strength in my body into that small point, as if pushing life back into it, inward and upward, the right way, without fear. 6, that's when it happened. A dark chunk of meat flew out of Liam's mouth, hit the plate, and bounced onto the wine-stained tablecloth. The sound was strange, wet, and then silence. A silence so deep you could hear the clock ticking again. Liam sucked in a breath like someone coming out of the water. A long, desperate, beautiful sigh. His chest filled. His eyes, previously glassy, filled with tears of relief. He coughed twice, then once more, and managed a slurred voice. I can," he said hoarsely. "Breathe slowly with me," I asked, keeping my hand on his back. "That's it. Slowly. 1, 2. Claire took a step, stopped, covered her face and cried loudly, in that way that you can't hold back. "My baby," she sobbed. "Liam." Richard didn't move for a second. Then, as if his body remembered how to function, he took a step forward and stopped in front of us. He looked at me as if he'd never seen me before. Not at my uniform, not at my badge, at me. "He's fine," I said, still panting. "He's breathing." I turned Liam slightly to the side, placed my hand between his shoulder blades, and let him finish coughing. My other hand trembled, but I didn't let go. I stayed with him until his face returned to its normal color, until his breathing became more regular. I stayed until I heard the sound I wanted most, that tired sigh of someone finally breathing. "Water," someone whispered. "Small sips, slowly," I replied without looking. "No lying down. He stays sitting." The waiter brought a glass. I held it with the boy, tilting it just a little. He took a sip and nodded, silently thanking him. His hands, which had previously been clutching his neck, now trembled in my fingers. It was then that I realized what had happened to the room. It froze. The guests stopped talking, moving, breathing loudly. The chandelier continued to shine, but no one noticed. Every head was turned toward us, and every eye was on me. I felt the weight of that gaze. It was no longer the gaze that passes over, passes through, ignores. It was different, heavy, full of questions, startled, as if I had just entered that house for the first time. When, in fact, I had always been there, Richard still stood in front of me, trying to find his words. The glow from the chandelier hit his face, but his eyes were different, more human. Liam sat breathing beside me, his small hand still trembling slightly in the glass of water. Claire wiped her tears with the crumpled napkin. "Where did you learn that?" Richard asked again, quietly, as if afraid of waking up from a nightmare. I took a deep breath. I smelled the hot sauce, the candles, the wine-soaked cloth. It was still the same room, but inside, it felt different. I looked at Liam first to make sure he was okay. He nodded, blushing again. Then I looked at my dad. "Before I was cleaning houses, I was training to be a nurse," I said slowly. "I did 2 years of community college. I wanted to work at the local hospital. I loved the idea of caring for people, but life put me on the spot." No one said anything. Even the silverware stopped clinking. I felt my heart beat faster, not out of fear, but out of genuineness. It was the first time I'd said that there, in that place that had always silenced me. "I got pregnant young," I continued. "My daughter's father left the scene in the 3rd month. I tried to handle everything: college, internship, weekend work, diaper changes, fever in the early morning. I slept for 2 hours, had breakfast, went to class. I held out as long as I could. Then I had to choose. Either I stayed with her, or I left her with someone I didn't even know so she could study. I couldn't. She cried, and I cried with her." Claire took a step, as if to close the distance between her life and mine. "What's her name?" she asked softly. "Sophia," I replied, with a smile that came to me on its own. "She's 8 years old now. She likes to draw on the kitchen tile with markers and says the world needs more cute wolves and fewer ugly monsters." Some of the guests laughed softly. A good laugh, not mocking. Richard looked away for a second, as if he'd seen me inside my house for the first time. "I stopped doing internships and went looking for work," I continued. "I washed clothes, ironed, cleaned houses, offices, anything that paid the rent and food. Sometimes I'd take on odd jobs at night. Sometimes I'd come home with burning legs and a heavy head, but Sophia would sleep with her hand open on my pillow, and that was enough." I looked up at the chandelier, just to hold back the tears that were coming. I didn't want to cry there. Not for myself. Inside, I remembered everything. The line at the health center, the crowded bus, the college notebook tucked away in the back of the drawer. "But I didn't want to forget everything I learned," I said, squaring my shoulders. "I took a first aid course at the local church. We used a rubber dummy, practiced compressions, learned the choking maneuver, the correct position, how to talk to someone who was scared. The instructor always said, 'You're not a doctor, but you can be the difference between despair and hope.' I treasured that like someone who treasures medicine." Liam looked at me curiously. "Did it hurt a lot?" he asked, his voice still hoarse. "You?" I smiled. "A little, right. But the lack of air hurt more. The maneuver is strong because it needs to be, and you were brave." He nodded, placing the glass on the table carefully, as if any movement might break the moment. One of the guests, a white-haired gentleman, cleared his throat. I never knew how to do that," he confessed. "We think money buys security, but it doesn't buy air." No one answered, but the sentence hung from the ceiling, swaying like the shadows of candles. Richard cleared his throat, still trying to find himself. "You were training to be a nurse," he repeated, as if he needed to hear it again to believe it. Why didn't you say anything? I took a breath and let some truth slip out, softly and firmly. Because in here, talking never worked, she said. I became part of the scenery. People wanted the dishes clean and the flowers in their place. My past didn't matter, and I learned to keep quiet. Invisibility is sometimes the price to pay for moving on. Claire put down her napkin and looked at me in a way she never had before. I'm so sorry, he said, with sincerity in his eyes. Really, I nodded, thanking him without a word. I didn't need a nice apology. I needed respect, and that's what I was beginning to feel there. There was one night, a few years ago, I added, more quietly. My neighbor's daughter choked on a piece of apple. Her mother came pounding on my door in despair, and I went into overdrive. I did the maneuver, just like today. The girl cried and then laughed, and I cried with her, with relief. Her mother hugged me so tightly I almost fell. That day, I promised myself, if I ever needed to, I would do it again, without thinking about what anyone would say, without asking for permission from fear. I saw Richard close his eyes for a moment, as if he'd been punched from within. When he opened them, there was no more steel there. There was a man. He began, but couldn't find the words. Thank you. It finally came out, strange on his lips, but true. I just did what needed to be done, I replied. Any mother, any loving person would do it. I felt a warmth in my chest, not of shame, but of pride. Small, quiet, but firm. The pride of someone who held the line and didn't break. And why didn't you go back to college? A woman across the table asked sincerely. I mean, maybe there's still time. I even thought about it, I admitted. But life has bills to pay every month. Sophia's grown, and so are the expenses. And I found a way to stay close to care, even far from the hospital. Sometimes, caring means holding the elevator door. It's having ice water at the right time. It's listening without judging. Today I understood that caring also means having courage when everyone else is panicking. The room was still quiet when Richard stepped closer. The glow from the chandelier hit his face. But his gaze was different. He took a deep breath, as if swallowing his pride, and lightly touched my arm. Not imposingly, but carefully. You saved what's most precious to me, he said, his voice low and firm. And if I didn't see you before, it was my blindness. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I didn't answer. I just stared at his large hands, which were now shaking a little. I want you to be responsible for the health of the house and my family, he added. Train everyone, create protocols, teach whatever is necessary. It's up to you. Claire nodded with tears in her eyes, as if that request also came from her heart. Please, she said sincerely, we need you. Liam beside me shyly squeezed my sleeve. Auntie, can you teach me tomorrow? I smiled inwardly. Outwardly, I thought it best to breathe first. My voice faltered, and I tried again. Yes, I can. All of you. Richard straightened his shoulders, but he didn't turn back into stone. He extended his hand as if offering a deal, only without the cold, without the distance. In fair pay, hours that work for you, whatever you need for your daughter, he said bluntly. I want to do this right. The word daughter hit me in the chest. I thought of Sophia with her crayon spread out on the kitchen table, drawing cute wolves. I thought of the month's bills, the crowded bus, the old fatigue, and for the first time there, I thought of a chance to be more than just. I'm not a doctor, I reminded her honestly. I can teach first aid, organize things, but I can't promise miracles. You already did one today, he replied without hesitation. We'll learn the rest together. The guests, who until then had just been watching, began to stir. One of them clapped timidly. Another joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. It wasn't the sound of a party. It was the sound of respect. I felt the heat rise in my face. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both. In my own way, I smiled a little. I wiped away a stubborn tear with the back of my hand. "Thank you," I said simply. "But what I did, anyone can do. The difference is that we need to know how to act first, and not be afraid." "So let's start there," Richard said. "Tomorrow, 8 in the morning, the whole team in the living room. And," he looked at me as if asking permission, "you choose what you need. Training dummies, kits, whatever. Just send me the list." I laughed softly, half in disbelief. "I've never made a list like that," I confessed. "Make the first one," he replied, "and please put your name on it." Claire took a step closer. Her perfume was sweet, but her gesture was even sweeter. She gently touched my shoulder. "I'm sorry I didn't see you before," he said. "I promise that changes now." "Okay," I replied, and this time I could really mean it. "We'll go ahead." Liam raised his glass of water, serious as a little man. "Here's to—" He looked at me, searching for the word safety. I snorted playfully. "To safety," he repeated, and some laughed excitedly. Richard took off his tie, as if dropping an old piece of it on the floor. He looked around and said to everyone, "From today on, no one in here is just anything," he stated, "especially those who save lives." I felt my legs grow light. The marble no longer chilled my feet. The house, enormous, suddenly seemed to fit in my hand, not because I commanded it, but because, finally, I existed within it. So, I turned to him, firmly holding my heart so it wouldn't escape through my mouth. "We'll start tomorrow. We start tomorrow," and he confirmed. And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I wanted to call Sophia right then and there and say, "Daughter, Mommy got a place with a name and everything," but I kept that joy in my pocket, right next to my courage to make it last longer. I thought that after Richard's "thank you" and Claire's tear-soaked hug, everything would lighten up. It didn't. The applause hadn't even died down when the whispers began, quiet but sharp. I recognized that sound. I've lived my whole life with it, cutting across my path. "It was luck," someone said near the sideboard. "It's luck," another repeated, as if trying to convince himself. A woman in an emerald green dress, famous in the neighborhood for organizing events and speaking as if she were giving people credit, approached the group of guests. I'd seen her car many times in front of the mansion. Evelyn Whitmore, sweet voice, venom in the background. "Darlings, don't overreact," she said, smiling toothily. "It was a scare, sure, but she's still just a maid. Let's not turn this into a show." The word "maid" slammed against me like a door slammed in my face. I felt the chill creeping up my body again, the same chill I'd left behind when I'd held Liam. I leaned against the back of a chair and breathed slowly, counting to 3. 1, 2, 3. I didn't want to cry there. Not after everything. "Just a maid," I heard the buffet waiter's voice whisper in the corner. "If it weren't for her—" Evelyn raised her hand, silencing him. "Honey, emotions confuse the mind. It'll pass tomorrow," she said. "Richard is practical. He knows how to separate gratitude from serious decisions." Her words slid through the room like oil. Some guests nodded, others made "don't get involved" faces. And then came more. "Training employees, responsible for the health of the house," murmured a man in a blue suit. I remembered him from Richard's meetings. "This has legal implications. Insurance, liability. What if it goes wrong next time? Who's responsible? Better call a company," suggested another. "Certification, contract, invoice. You can't just hand that over to—" Well, you get the idea. You get it. I did. I understood that, in their minds, my agreement had an expiration date. It wasn't worth becoming a job, a position, or a name on the list. It was to be remembered as a nice coincidence, a one-day wow, and that was it. Claire noticed the wind shifting. She approached Evelyn, unsmiling. "Evelyn, I think you didn't see what I saw," he said firmly. "My son was out of breath. She was the one who acted." "I saw it, Claire, I saw it," Evelyn replied, tilting her head as if speaking to a child. "But Richard's lawyers will call tomorrow. You know how it is. Everything needs to be professionalized. Don't get mad at me. I'm just being rational. Rational. Funny how certain words wash away the guilt of those who speak. I remained silent, remembering Sophia, the bus, the rubber doll from school, remembering the sound of the piece of meat hitting the plate. Rational was having learned something that could save lives and use it when needed. Rational was teaching everyone so no one would freeze again. The rest was fear in a suit. Richard approached the group, drawn by the hubbub. His suit had lost its arrogance, but his face was divided. He heard one, then another, and frowned. The man in the blue suit began, "Richard, before making any decisions, I suggest consulting legal counsel. Internal training involves risks. What if someone gets hurt? What if the technique is applied incorrectly? The media loves a poorly told story." Evelyn added softly, "You're a leader, dear. You need to think with your head, not your heart. The night was exciting, sure, but tomorrow is Monday." I looked at Liam. He stared back at me, biting his lip, his hands still shaking slightly. He was afraid of losing his breath again. I know that fear. It stays in your body even after you're already breathing. "Father," he called softly, "I want her to teach me." Everyone heard. The silence that followed gave me the courage to look up. I wasn't going to scream or fight. I wasn't going to beg. I was just going to exist, completely, with the same calm that had saved me in times of trouble. "I understand your concerns," I said, looking at their faces one by one. "Insurance, responsibility, all of this is serious. I'm the first to say it has to be done right. List, materials, protocol, authorization. Everything." Evelyn crossed her arms, a little impatient. She forced. "But letting fear decide for you is the quickest way to repeat what happened today." I replied simply. Liam choked in front of a lot of people, and a lot of people froze. Not out of malice, because they didn't know what to do. First aid doesn't replace a doctor. It buys time. Sometimes it saves time. The white-haired man, the one who had spoken of the air that money can't buy, nodded vigorously. "She's right," he said. "I have grandchildren. I'd pay for a course tomorrow." The man in the blue suit tried to get around it. "No one is against teaching. The question is, who teaches? We need certification." "I can get certified," I said, staring at him without lowering my head. "I can study again. I can take tests. I can show what I know. I'm not afraid of tests. I'm just afraid of standing around with my arms crossed when someone needs air." Evelyn laughed lightly, as if pushing a glass across the table. "What a nice speech," he said. "But you have no resume. Richard needs big names." Richard looked at Evelyn, then at me. I saw the struggle within him, the pressure of the big names on one side, the breathing of his son on the other. He ran a hand over his face wearily, and for a second I feared I'd become invisible again. I felt the old shadow approaching, the one that says, "Thank you, you can go back to the kitchen." Claire took her husband's hand. It wasn't a stage gesture, it was a request. "Richard," she said, "don't do what's easy, do what's right." The buffet waiter, the youngest, spoke without meaning to, stumbling over his courage. "Sir, I bring my sister to train. She takes care of my niece. We're afraid of these things. Please." Evelyn rolled her eyes but remained silent. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, as if they'd been pulled into a conversation they'd rather not have. "I don't want a fancy job," I said more quietly. "I want commitment. If you want a big company to certify, that's fine. I'll help organize, schedule, call everyone, prepare the place. But I also want to be able to teach. Not alone, but together, officially. If I make a mistake, I'll own up. If I get it right, I'll keep going." Richard stared at the floor for a moment, listening to the low sound of breathing, the crackling of glass in the chandelier, the clock that insisted on ticking away every second as if to say, "Decide." When he looked up, I had already prepared myself for the "we'll see," the "we'll talk later," the "I appreciate it, but..." "Tomorrow, 8 in the morning, he said, without trembling. Training with her. And whoever else she indicates, legal will be involved to formalize it. If certification is needed, we'll arrange it. I won't cancel the right thing for fear of what might go wrong. Evelyn frowned. You're emotional, Richard. I'm alive, he replied, and so is my son. She took a breath, lifted her chin, and delivered the final blow. Okay. Just don't expect the whole neighborhood to think this is appropriate. I felt her sentence cut me to the core, but it didn't bleed. I'd bled too much in silence. Now I just felt the cut and stood up. It's appropriate that Liam is here speaking, I said, looking at her. It's appropriate that everyone knows the basics, so they don't watch someone go down. She didn't answer. She gave a half smile and walked away, her heel hitting the marble like a hammer. When she disappeared through the door, I took another deep breath. The air rushed in. The fear of losing everything was still there, tight in my pocket, but above it there was a small flame of excitement. It wasn't victory, it was the beginning of a fight. And I'd known how to fight in silence for years. Liam leaned against my arm. I'll be home early tomorrow, he said, as serious as only a child can be. I smiled, tired and whole. Tomorrow we start, champion. The next day, at 8 o'clock sharp, I was already in the living room. I pushed the sofa into the corner, rolled up the rug, and pulled out a side table for support. The sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the space that would now become a classroom. I'd never actually taught, but the memory of my old nursing station came flooding back. And with it, the courage I didn't know I still carried. One by one, the employees arrived. The driver, hands in his pockets, the gardener with his cap in his hands, the two waitresses exchanging glances and stifling laughter. Even the buffet waiter, who wasn't even part of the regular staff, appeared. I knew what they were thinking. What's this one going to teach? Richard followed close behind, arms crossed, observing as if it were a business meeting. Claire brought a tray of coffee and water, as if offering support without saying anything. And Liam sat on the floor, excited as if it were the first day of school. Good morning, everyone. I began, trying to hide the butterflies in my stomach. Yesterday, we had a scare that no one here wants to repeat. Liam is fine because he reacted quickly. But it could have been different. So today we're going to learn the basics of first aid. The driver raised an eyebrow. But isn't that a doctor's thing? I shook my head calmly. No. A doctor treats. First aid holds life in check until the doctor arrives. It's the difference between losing time and having time. I used my hands to demonstrate the correct position for abdominal compression. I grabbed a large pillow and held it against my body. We'll practice here. It's simple, but it requires attention and strength in the right place, I said. Who goes first? Silence. Everyone looked at each other, chuckling softly. The waitress muttered, "Oh, I'm not going to be the guinea pig." It was Liam who raised his hand. "Me," he said, his eyes shining. Richard tried to protest. "Liam, no." "Dad, I want to," the boy insisted. I held back a laugh. I placed the pillow in front of him and showed him where his hands should be. Here, above the navel, never on the ribs, never too low. Push inward and upward. Let's go. He pushed gently, a little weakly. I laughed and encouraged. That's it. Now more firmly. Imagine you're helping someone breathe. The class loosened up. The gardener ended up laughing and came over to try. He got the position wrong, so I patiently corrected him. The driver grumbled that it wasn't necessary, but when he saw everyone trying, he took 2 steps forward and practiced too. "Harder," I said as he pushed. "If I push any harder, it'll break the person in half," he grumbled. "It won't break, it'll save them," I replied firmly. The waitresses, who had been laughing before, began to pay attention. One of them picked up the cushion and repeated the movement. I corrected her arms and adjusted her feet. Gradually, the laughter turned to concentration. Richard, silent, observed everything. I saw the way he looked at each employee. as if it were the first time he realized how important they all were. Claire wrote it down on her phone, perhaps so she wouldn't forget any details. After the choking maneuvers, I demonstrated how to act in cases of fainting. I asked the gardener to lie down on the mat. I explained the safe lateral position and how to maintain a clear airway. Never leave someone unconscious on their back. They might choke on their own tongue, I said, demonstrating calmly. The group approached, alert. Some asked, "What if it's bleeding? What if it's a child? What if it breaks an arm?" I answered them one by one, without rushing. They weren't silly questions. They were fears of people who wanted to help, but had never learned how. By late morning, everyone had practiced. Sweat stood out on their foreheads, not from fatigue, but from the release of tension. The driver straightened his shirt and said, "I never thought I'd learn this, especially here." Claire smiled. "Me neither. But I sleep better now." Liam ran to me and hugged my waist. "You were amazing, Auntie." His hug was worth more than all the applause from the night before. When the employees left, I noticed the room was different. The air was lighter, and so was their gaze on me. It was no longer that look that passes over, that passes through. It was respect. It was trust. Richard approached at last, serious but not cold. "They listened to you," he said, "because I spoke to them as equals." I replied, "That's how it works." He nodded thoughtfully. For the first time, it seemed to me he understood the obvious, that no one in that house was just something. That day I wasn't invisible, and I never would be again. The next party took place 2 weeks later. The house was full again. Polite laughter, clinking glasses, expensive perfume mixed with the scent of fresh flowers. I had already given 3 training sessions. The driver spoke of the lateral safety position as if he had been born knowing it. The waitresses corrected guests who patted the back of coffers. Liam walked proudly with a leaflet I had designed myself, full of arrows and simple steps. I moved around the room as usual, but I no longer felt like part of the furniture. I had a name, and for the first time, that name seemed to fit in a loud voice. Amidst the hubbub, I noticed a man in a dark blue suit I didn't recognize. Broad shoulders, a smirk, the kind that chews over words before spitting them out. He approached Richard. A group formed, and I heard my name come up without my asking. "So it's true, Richard," the man said, raising an eyebrow. "Entrusting your family's safety to just a maid." The word "just" was laced with venom. I shivered, but I remained still. Claire pursed her lips. Liam squeezed my hand, hidden beside the sideboard. Richard was in profile to me. I watched as his spine straightened. Slowly, he set his glass down, wiped his fingers on his napkin, and turned fully to the man. "Repeat," he said, without raising his voice. The guest chuckled. "Don't get mad, Richard. It's just that there's protocol, companies, certified professionals, and you finally decided," he waved his hand in the air, "to outsource to the goodwill of the house." Evelyn, that neighbor in the emerald dress, approached as if smelling trouble. "I warned you," she whispered to anyone who would listen. "The emotion passes, Monday comes." Some chuckled. Others looked away. The buffet waiter stood still, as if he couldn't blink. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling the air course through my body. I wasn't going to hide, but I wasn't going to fight either. My strength was there. In the breath, I helped others remember to draw. Richard stood up straight, calmly. The room noticed and fell silent. Even the chandelier seemed to pay attention. "She's not just anything," he said clearly. "She saved my son when no one else knew what to do, and that's worth more than any title." The silence that followed was so sharp you could hear ice cracking inside a glass. The man in the blue suit fidgeted with his wrist uncomfortably. "Richard, don't personalize," he tried. "We're talking about risk management, not affection." "I'm talking about responsibility," Richard replied, "and gratitude and competence." 3 things you confuse with affection when you don't want to admit you've missed the point. Evelyn forced a short laugh. What a beautiful speech, he said. But tell me, if one day something goes wrong with this homemade program of yours, who will be held accountable? I took a breath and stepped forward. I didn't ask permission, I existed. I'm responsible for what I do, I said, looking at them both. And that's why I created a protocol, listed materials, hired a company to certify the team, and requested the presence of the legal department in the room. Everything's recorded. I can teach, but I don't do anything alone. Here, everyone learns, because here, no one is just anything. Some of the guests lowered their eyes. Claire nodded with quiet pride. And if you want, I continued, still in my soft voice, I can teach you too. It'll take half an hour. You'll learn where to place your hand, how hard to press it, and how to talk to someone who's scared. It won't hurt, I swear. The man opened his mouth, closed it. He coughed out an apology that didn't come out. Evelyn rolled her eyes. But there was no audience anymore. The entire room was staring at Richard and me, at that axis that had suddenly become the backbone of the house. Liam broke the silence with the seriousness of someone who knows what he's talking about. She saved me, he said. I trust her. His words fell into the crowd like a stone in a pond. The circle parted. One of the guests, the white-haired man, raised his glass. To the people who know what to do when everything else stops, he toasted. To the hands that give air. Several repeated. Glasses clinked. The sound was different. It wasn't ostentatious. It was respectful. Richard then turned to me, and it wasn't just the boss speaking. It was the father, the man, the master of the house who had learned to breathe as well. You're responsible for health care here, he stated loudly, for everyone to hear. And it's with you that I want to create a program for the houses in the condominium. If these people love protocol so much, let's take it to the entire street. Are you up for leadership? My throat closed up in the good way, the way it stops the tears from turning into tears. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time, like a child who gets a present and is startled by its size. I'll do it, I said firmly, on one condition. Which one? He asked. Nobody here calls anyone just, I replied. Not the maid, not the gardener, not the driver, not the neighbor, not the maid. Because the day you need air again, the one who runs first could be any one of us. Silence. Then, a soft amen from the waiter. Laughter and more toasts. Evelyn pressed her lips together, turned, and walked away. Her heels lost their hammer-like beat. They became the hurried click of someone who doesn't want to hear their own echo. The man in the blue suit murmured that he'd think about it and disappeared into a conversation about investments, now without an audience. Claire came to me. She had no tears. She had light. Thank you, she said, for saving my son, for saving us from ourselves. We just learned how to breathe, I replied. The rest is practice. Liam hugged me from behind. I leaned in, wrapping my arms around him. I felt the gentle weight of a living child. I felt my heart beating calmly in the right place. Richard raised his voice again, not to show off, but to make a point. Today, here, the winners are those who have courage and knowledge, he said. The rest, learn. The room fell silent again. That silence of respect that warms, not cuts. I stood in the middle of nowhere and everyone at the same time. I wasn't just... I was useful. I was seen. I was worthy. And that night, inside that house that had already made me so small, I felt exactly the size of who I had always been. After that night, the mansion was never the same. The air in the hallways felt different. Even the carpets felt softer, as if they'd been washed clean of the chill that had lingered there. And for the first time, I walked through the rooms without feeling invisible. Liam became my daily companion. Every day when I arrived, he would run up to me and hug me tightly, one of those hugs that seems to sew you together from the inside. "Good morning, Auntie," he would say with a wide smile. I always replied the same way. "Good morning, champ. Are you ready to learn something else today?" He would laugh and start asking about first aid exercises. Claire has changed too. Before, she'd walk past me like someone walking through a door, without noticing. Now she'd stop, ask about Sophia, want to know how I was. One afternoon we sat together on the porch, the sun setting behind the Los Angeles hills, and she said to me, "I thought I understood love, but I only understood appearances. You taught me to see what matters." I smiled, my heart aching, and replied, "Love is simple, Miss Claire. It's listening. It's being close. That's it." And Richard didn't become a saint overnight, but he transformed in a way no one expected. He came to me one late afternoon with an envelope in his hand. "Here it is," he said, handing it over. "Your tuition payment. You're going back to school." I was speechless. All I could stammer out was, "But I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," he replied firmly. "You don't owe me anything. Quite the opposite. I owe you my son's life." I cried. I couldn't hold it back. I hugged the envelope to my chest and thought of Sophia drawing in the kitchen. I thought of the dream I'd kept tucked away in the back of the drawer. For the first time, I felt like it might not be too late, but it didn't stop there. Richard gathered lawyers, business owners, and neighbors and created a social program in my name. He called it Project First Breath. The idea was simple: train single mothers in first aid, provide scholarships, and guarantee employment. "The world needs more women like you," he said, looking me in the eye. "And I want to help find those women." At the project's inauguration, my palms were sweaty and my heart was pounding. The room was full but not luxurious. It was full of mothers, young people, and elderly women, all with the same struggling expression I recognized in the mirror. I took the microphone, looked at the audience, and said, "I'm not special. I'm just like each of you. What brought me here was not giving up. What saved Liam was a simple course anyone can take. And what will save other lives is us believing that we're not just nothing." The applause that followed was the most beautiful I've ever heard, not because it was loud, but because it was full of faith. When I got home that night, Sophia was at the kitchen table, her crayons scattered. "Mom, look what I drew," she said proudly. It was a huge heart with arms reaching out. "It's you," she explained, "because you hold everyone together." I hugged her, tears streaming down my face. "No, daughter, now it's not just me. Now there are many of us. Sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who will save your life. Never treat someone as less than, because that person might be the one who changes everything." End of story.